In a quiet corner of a Tokyo electronics retailer, a customer lifts the lid of a modern rice cooker, tracing a finger over a familiar corporate logo. The nameplate reads Hitachi. For generations, that simple word carried a specific kind of domestic weight. It meant heavy industry, power generators, electric trains, and the steady hum of a machine that never failed to cook dinner. But if that customer were to look closer at the manufacturing label on the back, they would discover a quiet truth. The factory that once engineered this cooking vessel no longer builds it. The heavy industrial giant that forged the brand has moved on to global infrastructure in digital systems, while its consumer appliance operations have shifted into international joint ventures and brand licensing. How does one of the most trusted names in household engineering step away from the appliance that shaped daily family life? And what happens when a logo outlives the factory floor that gave it meaning? The story of Hitachi in the kitchen is not a tale of sudden bankruptcy or dramatic collapse. It is a slow structural evolution of how global manufacturing changed the objects we depend on most. But the real story of Hitachi is not the story of one appliance or one factory. It is the story of how engineering, manufacturing, family life, and consumer trust change together. Every week, we reconstruct the stories behind the appliances, factories, engineers, repair shops, and family routines that quietly shaped everyday life. Subscribe if those forgotten industrial memories still matter to you. To understand why a company like Hitachi ever cared about a pot of rice, we have to look back at the domestic landscape of mid-century Japan. In the years following the Second World War, urban households were transforming. Coal stoves, wood-burning hearths, and aluminum pots that required constant human supervision were slowly giving way to the promise of electrical living. Cooking rice, the daily anchor of every household meal, demanded unyielding attention. It required precise control of heat, a careful watch over boiling water, and an experienced eye to prevent the bottom from scorching. In cramped city apartments, freeing up time was an industrial necessity. Into this environment stepped Japan's growing electrical machinery companies. Hitachi, founded decades earlier as a small repair shop for a copper mine in Ibaraki Prefecture, had grown into a heavy industrial leviathan. It built locomotives, heavy turbines, transformers, and industrial motors. But as Japanese society modernized, the company recognized that the technologies powering large factories could be scaled down to serve the domestic home. The early electric rice cookers, introduced across the market in the 1950s, were remarkably simple mechanical devices. They relied on basic bimetallic thermostats and magnetic switches. They did not think, they simply applied raw heat until a threshold was reached. Yet for millions of households, the transition from an open flame to an electric plug represented a profound domestic revolution. Hitachi brought its heavy manufacturing discipline to these small consumer goods. The company's engineers approached the kitchen not as a space for decorative gadgets, but as an extension of industrial engineering. If Hitachi could build massive turbines for hydroelectric dams, it could certainly engineer a heating element that would cook a stable, reliable pot of white rice. The company had solved the problem of scale, but the domestic market was about to demand a higher level of culinary precision. The turning point for consumer appliances came when basic heating plates evolved into precision-controlled cooking systems. By the 1970s and 1980s, the battle among Japanese appliance manufacturers was no longer about simply getting water to boil. It was about texture, consistency, and automation. Hitachi's engineering divisions responded by integrating microcomputers, known as MICOM technology, into domestic rice cookers. Instead of a single mechanical switch responding to a single temperature peak, a microprocessor began monitoring the entire cooking cycle. Sensors inside the lid and beneath the heavy aluminum inner pot tracked temperature curves in real time. The cooker adjusted heat levels dynamically, moving through soaking, rapid heating, steaming, and final warming stages without human intervention. For the consumer, this technical leap translated into a very specific physical experience. You measured the rice, added water to the exact line inside the multi-layer inner pot, closed the heavy lid with a satisfying mechanical click, and pressed a single button. You walked away. The machine took over the culinary judgment that generations of cooks had performed by hand. Inside Hitachi's manufacturing plants, this meant a massive shift. Assembly lines that once produced heavy industrial equipment now housed precision electronics workstations, automated soldering bays, and rigorous quality control testing chambers. Every inner pot underwent strict thermal stress testing. Every heating plate was calibrated to ensure uniform heat distribution. Competitors like Zojirushi, Tiger, and Panasonic were pushing similar innovations, creating an intense domestic arms race for culinary perfection. But Hitachi held a distinct psychological advantage. Consumers reasoned that a company trusted to build heavy electrical infrastructure for the nation could certainly be trusted to manage the daily meal. Yet beneath this engineering pride, a hidden vulnerability was forming. Small consumer appliances required massive retail distribution, rapid product iteration, and low profit margins. A very different economic reality from heavy industrial machinery and public infrastructure contracts. And the market was about to demand even greater complexity. By the 1990s, Hitachi's domestic rice cookers occupied a position of quiet dominance in appliance shops across Japan and expanding export markets. This was the era of the golden years, when the brand's product catalogs were fixtures in department stores, and warranty cards were carefully filed away in kitchen drawers alongside instruction manuals. Walk into a typical suburban kitchen during this period, and you would likely find a Hitachi Micom cooker resting on a dedicated appliance shelf, its white or metallic plastic housing showing minor scuffs from years of daily use. The steam vent on top emitted a steady, predictable hiss at midday and evening. The control panel, featuring tactile plastic buttons and a small digital display, showed the lingering signs of fingerprints from family members who interacted with it every single day. This was also an era supported by robust repair networks. When a thermal fuse blew after years of continuous service, owners did not immediately discard the appliance. They took it to local authorized dealers or repair shops where technicians could easily source replacement parts, test the internal wiring, and restore the cooker to service. The object was designed to be repaired, maintained, and lived with for a decade or more. If you stood inside Hitachi's major manufacturing facilities during this peak era, you witnessed an integrated industrial ecosystem. Here, heavy metal stamping, precision electronics assembly, and rigorous metallurgical research into inner pot non-stick coatings happened under one corporate umbrella. But this integration was expensive. The stakes were clear. Hitachi was not merely selling a cooking pot, it was anchoring its reputation as a household companion. If that connection eroded, the company would lose its most intimate touchpoint with everyday consumers. And beneath the polished exterior of department store displays, global market forces were already preparing to dismantle the economic model that made such craftsmanship possible. The brand's presence in the kitchen felt permanent, but the foundations supporting that permanence were shifting. The first small cracks in Hitachi's domestic appliance dominance did not appear as a sudden corporate catastrophe. They appeared quietly on retail shelves. As global manufacturing supply chains matured through the late 1990s and 2000s, production costs in Japan rose sharply. Specialized appliance competitors streamlined their operations, while aggressive new entrants from neighboring industrial hubs began producing high-performance rice cookers at a fraction of the cost. Retailers compressed shelf space, demanding faster turnover and lower wholesale prices. Hitachi, as a massive multinational conglomerate spanning power systems, information technology, and heavy infrastructure, faced a strategic dilemma. Consumer white goods, refrigerators, washing machines, and rice cookers, yielded razor-thin profit margins compared to multi-billion-dollar infrastructure and digital transformation contracts. Maintaining domestic factories dedicated to small kitchen appliances required continuous capital expenditure in an increasingly saturated market. The technology shift compounded the pressure. The market moved rapidly toward advanced induction heating and pressurized cooking systems, demanding heavier, more complex multi-layer pots lined with exotic materials. Developing these technologies required specialized R&D investment that struggled to compete with the sheer scale of emerging global manufacturing giants. Gradually, the manufacturing footprint began to shift. Internal production lines in Japan were scaled back or moved to overseas assembly plants. Component sourcing was outsourced to external suppliers. The local repair culture, once supported by an extensive network of neighborhood dealers, stocking specific replacement parts, began to contract as appliances became cheaper to replace than to repair. Corporate restructuring accelerated the separation. Hitachi Limited began spinning off and consolidating its consumer electronics and white goods divisions into joint ventures, seeking shelter in corporate partnerships rather than standalone domestic manufacturing. The famous brand name remained, but the industrial entity behind it was transforming beyond recognition. By the 2010s and 2020s, the transformation was complete. Hitachi effectively exited direct in-house manufacturing of small kitchen appliances, transitioning its operations into brand licensing and external manufacturing collaborations. The heavy industrial giant had quietly stepped away from the kitchen counter. Factories closed, production moved. Engineers shifted divisions. Brands were licensed. Supply chains fragmented. The logo survived. The factory vanished. What remains of Hitachi in the history of the modern kitchen is a complex monument to industrial evolution. The company did not fail. It simply outgrew the appliance market. While many legacy brands collapsed into bankruptcy, Hitachi chose a quiet corporate retreat, folding its consumer ambitions into global partnerships while its core operations focused on digital infrastructure, energy grids, and heavy enterprise technology. Yet in countless kitchens across Japan and Asia, older Hitachi rice cookers continue to operate. Collectors and long-term owners point to the enduring quality of those mid-era MICOM and IH machines, appliances whose heavy inner pots and sturdy mechanical switches were built during an era when a heavy machinery conglomerate treated the family dinner with industrial seriousness. Modern appliances are lighter, smarter, and connected to smartphone applications, but they rarely carry the weight of a heavy industrial legacy. They are consumer electronics, easily swapped out when a new model arrives. The era when a locomotive and turbine manufacturer built the pot that cooked your evening rice is an industrial chapter that is quietly closed. On a kitchen shelf, a faded, decades-old cooker still sits plugged into the wall. The digital display is dim, the plastic casing is yellowed by time, and the non-stick coating inside bears the microscopic scratches of countless meals. But when the power cord is plugged in and the switch is pressed downward, the heating plate still warms, reminding anyone paying attention of an era when engineering, manufacturing, and family routine were bound together in a single heavy metal shell. See you in the next video.